Rome was not built in a day. You've heard the saying, but have you ever truly stopped to consider what it means? We are not just talking about a city. We are talking about an idea, a civilization so dominant, so vast, so enduring, that more than 1,500 years after its fall, its shadow still stretches across every corner of the modern world. Walk into any European parliament. You will see Roman columns. Open a law book in America, France, or Pakistan. You will find Roman principles. Look at your calendar. August is named after Augustus Caesar. Our political vocabulary: republic, senate, dictator, veto. All Latin. All Roman. The Roman Catholic Church, the most powerful religious institution in human history, is headquartered in the very city where Rome was born. Rome dominated the world for over 2,000 years. At its peak, 1 in every 5 human beings alive on this planet was a Roman citizen. The empire stretched from the misty highlands of Scotland to the scorching deserts of Mesopotamia, from the Atlantic coast of Portugal to the banks of the Euphrates River in modern-day Iraq. How did a small cluster of villages on the banks of the Tiber River become the most powerful civilization the ancient world had ever seen? How did they build a military machine that crushed every rival it faced? How did they design a political system so sophisticated that
every great civilization needs a great origin story? Rome's is perhaps the most dramatic of them all. According to Roman mythology, twin brothers named Romulus and Remus were born to the god of war, Mars, through a mortal woman named Rhea Silvia. Because they were the illegitimate children of a god, they were seen as a political threat, and so they were abandoned, thrown into the Tiber River to die. But the gods had other plans. The infants floated downstream and washed ashore at the base of the Palatine Hill, one of Rome's famous 7 hills. There, a she-wolf, sacred to Mars, discovered them. Rather than devouring them, she nursed them, kept them warm, and raised them as her own. Eventually, a shepherd named Faustulus found the boys and brought them home. His wife, Acca Larentia, raised them as her sons. The boys grew into warriors. They discovered their true identity, overthrew the tyrant who had wronged their mother, and then set out to found a city of their own, the city their destiny demanded.
They chose the hills of Latium, beside the Tiber River, as their location. But a bitter argument broke out between them over which hill should be the center of the new city. The argument turned violent. Remus was killed by Romulus himself, according to most accounts. And so Romulus became the sole founder and first king of the city he named after himself, Roma. The year, according to Roman tradition, was 753 BC. This is the legend. But what does history actually tell us? Modern archaeology and scholarship paint a different picture, though one equally fascinating. Based on excavations conducted throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, archaeologists believe that Rome began to take shape around 625 BC, somewhat later than the mythological date. The site was a strategic one. The Tiber River was navigable, which meant trade. The surrounding hills provided natural defense. The fertile plains of the Latin region could feed a growing population. The people who settled here were not Romans yet. They were Latins, a group of Indo-European tribes who had migrated to the Italian peninsula centuries earlier. They lived in small, scattered villages on the hilltops. Slowly, these villages began to merge. Common festivals, shared markets, and the need for mutual defense against neighboring peoples, including the powerful Etruscans to the north, pushed these communities together. Rome was not invented. Rome grew. Like a tree from a seed, it spread its roots down into the volcanic soil of Latium and refused to stop growing until it had swallowed the world. The earliest phase of Roman history, roughly from 625 BC to 509 BC, is known as the period of kings. Rome was ruled by 7 monarchs during this era, and the institution of kingship worked very differently from what we might expect. The Roman king was not a hereditary ruler. He did not automatically pass the crown to his son. Instead, the king was selected by the Senate, a council of elder nobles who served as Rome's permanent governing body. The word Senate comes from the Latin senex, meaning old man. These were the elders, the experienced, the wise, or at least those wealthy enough to claim such titles. The Senate would elect a king, and upon the king's death, the Senate would choose again. This made Roman kingship a hybrid system, monarchical in function, but aristocratic in selection. It gave the noble families enormous power over the fate of the city. Rome's 7 kings included figures of legend and historical record alike. The first, Romulus himself, was said to have organized Rome's earliest military and social structures. He created the first legions. He established the Comitia Curiata, Rome's earliest citizen assembly. He reportedly expanded the city's population by offering asylum to runaway slaves, exiles, and criminals from surrounding regions, a remarkably practical move for a city that needed bodies to survive. The kings who followed built upon this foundation. Numa Pompilius was a peaceful king who organized Rome's religious calendar and established its priestly orders. Tullus Hostilius was a warrior who expanded Rome's territory through conquest. Ancus Marcius extended Rome to the coast, establishing the port of Ostia. Tarquinius Priscus built the Circus Maximus, the great racetrack that would eventually hold 250,000 spectators. Servius Tullius reformed Rome's army and society. And then came the 7th king, and the last.
His name was Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. History knows him simply as Tarquin the Proud. He was, by most accounts, a tyrant, cruel, arrogant, and contemptuous of both the Senate and the common people. He ruled not by consent, but by fear. He ignored the Senate. He murdered political opponents. He taxed the poor to fund his own glory. His reign might have continued indefinitely. Tyranny has a way of perpetuating itself. But then, a single act of violence changed everything. In 509 BC, Tarquin's son Sextus raped a noblewoman named Lucretia. She was the wife of a Roman nobleman, a woman of impeccable character and reputation. After the assault, she called her father and husband to her, told them what had been done to her, made them swear an oath of revenge, and then killed herself. The story of Lucretia exploded through Rome like a fire in dry grass. The nobleman who had sworn the oath, led by a man named Lucius Junius Brutus, organized a rebellion. The people rose up. The Senate expelled Tarquin and his family. And with that act, the Age of Kings came to an end. Rome would never have another king. Or so they believed.
The expulsion of Tarquin the Proud in 509 BC marked the beginning of one of the most remarkable experiments in human governance the world has ever seen, the Roman Republic. For nearly 500 years, Rome would be governed not by a king, but by a system of elected officials, divided powers, and legal accountability. The new system worked like this. The Senate remained the permanent governing body, made up of several hundred members drawn from Rome's noble families. But the executive power that had previously rested with the king was now divided between 2 elected officials called consuls. These consuls served for exactly 1 year, never more. Each consul had the power to veto the other's decisions, a system designed specifically to prevent any single person from accumulating too much power. The word veto, which we still use in the United Nations Security Council, in the United States Congress, and in governments around the world, is Latin. It means I forbid. Rome gave us this word, and with it, this concept. The Senate was divided into 2 main classes. The patricians were the old aristocracy, Rome's wealthy elite families who traced their lineage back to the city's founding. The plebeians were everyone else, merchants, craftsmen, farmers, soldiers, and the urban poor. Initially, only patricians could hold high office, become senators, or serve as priests. The plebeians were largely excluded from power. This inequality became a source of constant tension throughout the Republic's history. The plebeians were not passive about their exclusion. They organized, they protested, they threatened to leave Rome entirely, a tactic known as secession, and gradually, over centuries, they won concession after concession from the patrician elite. By the 4th century BC, plebeians could become consuls. By the 3rd century, they had their own elected representatives, the tribunes of the plebs, who could veto any Senate decision they considered harmful to the common people. The tribunes were sacrosanct. It was a capital crime to harm them. This process of gradual democratic expansion was one of the Republic's great strengths. Unlike many ancient systems that maintained rigid hierarchies until they collapsed under the weight of their own injustice, Rome's Republic adapted. It bent without breaking. For a while. But before we get to the Republic's ultimate failure, we must understand what made it great. Because in its era of greatness, the Roman Republic built something truly extraordinary. To understand Rome's expansion, you must understand its army. The Roman legion was, by the standards of the ancient world, a miracle of organization, discipline, and tactical innovation. The basic unit of the Roman army was the legion, a force of roughly 5,000 heavily armed infantrymen supported by cavalry, engineers, and specialized units. But what made the legion extraordinary was not just its size, it was its flexibility. Earlier armies of the ancient world, like the Greek phalanx, relied on large blocks of men moving together in formation. This worked brilliantly on flat, open ground, but in mountainous terrain or against irregular enemies who refused to stand and fight in the open field, the phalanx became clumsy and vulnerable. The Romans solved this problem by organizing their legions into smaller, more independent units called maniples and later cohorts. These units could operate semi-independently, wheel and maneuver on broken terrain, refuse a flank attack, or press an advantage without waiting for the entire army to respond. It gave the Roman army a tactical intelligence that no other force of the ancient world could match.
Add to this the Roman genius for logistics, for feeding, supplying, and moving armies over vast distances, and you begin to understand how Rome could sustain military campaigns for decades at a time, thousands of miles from its home base. Rome's first great expansion was within the Italian peninsula itself. By 338 BC, Rome had brought the entire peninsula under its control, not simply by conquest, but through a sophisticated policy of incorporating defeated enemies as allies, granting them Roman citizenship in varying degrees, and making them stakeholders in Rome's continued success. A defeated enemy who became a Roman citizen had every reason to fight for Rome the next time Rome went to war. This was Rome's secret weapon. It grew stronger as it expanded because it turned its enemies into Romans.
By the mid-3rd century BC, Rome had mastered Italy. But beyond the waters of the Mediterranean lay a rival that would test Rome to its absolute limits, and in the testing, forged the most powerful military civilization the ancient world had ever seen. Carthage was an empire built on trade. Founded by Phoenician colonists from the coast of modern-day Lebanon, Carthage sat on the northern coast of Africa, in what is today Tunisia. It controlled the western Mediterranean, the sea lanes along which passed the wine, grain, silver, and tin that fed the ancient economy. Carthage had the richest treasury in the Mediterranean world, the most powerful navy, and a sprawling network of territories that included northern Africa, Sardinia, Corsica, and most of Sicily. Sicily was the problem. This large island sat at the crossroads of Mediterranean trade, and both Rome and Carthage wanted it. By the mid-3rd century BC, Rome had mastered Italy. But beyond the waters of the Mediterranean lay a rival that would test Rome to its absolute limits, and in the testing, forged the most powerful military civilization the ancient world had ever seen. Carthage was an empire built on trade. Founded by Phoenician colonists from the coast of modern-day Lebanon, Carthage sat on the northern coast of Africa, in what is today Tunisia. It controlled the western Mediterranean, the sea lanes along which passed the wine, grain, silver, and tin that fed the ancient economy. Carthage had the richest treasury in the Mediterranean world, the most powerful navy, and a sprawling network of territories that included northern Africa, Sardinia, Corsica, and most of Sicily. Sicily was the problem. This large island sat at the crossroads of Mediterranean trade, and both Rome and Carthage wanted it.
The First Punic War lasted 23 years and ended in 241 BC with a Roman victory. Rome gained Sicily, its first overseas province, and a taste for Mediterranean power. But the Second Punic War, and the man who led Carthage in it, would test Rome in ways that the First War never could. His name was Hannibal Barca. He was perhaps the greatest military commander in the history of the ancient world, a tactician of such genius that his battles are still studied in military academies today. Hannibal grew up hating Rome. His father Hamilcar, a Carthaginian general of the First Punic War, had reportedly made the young Hannibal swear an oath of eternal enmity to Rome before allowing him to accompany his army to Spain. In 218 BC, Hannibal did something that no commander before him had dared to attempt. He marched an army of roughly 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants out of Spain, through the south of Gaul, and over the Alps, in winter, into the heart of Italy. The crossing cost him nearly half his army to cold, starvation, and the attacks of hostile mountain tribes. But he arrived in Italy's Po Valley with a force still capable of fighting, and then he proceeded to inflict on Rome the most catastrophic series of defeats in its history.
At the Tiber River in 218 BC, Hannibal destroyed a Roman army of 40,000. At Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, he ambushed and annihilated 15,000 Roman soldiers. And at Cannae in 216 BC, the battle that military historians have called the most tactically perfect victory in ancient history, Hannibal enveloped and destroyed a Roman army of 70,000 men in a single afternoon. 70,000 Romans died at Cannae in a single day. The Senate rooms fell silent as the casualty reports came in. Rome began to draft teenagers and slaves into the army. Half of Rome's allies defected to Hannibal. And yet, Rome did not surrender. This is perhaps the most important moment in Roman history. Any other civilization, any civilization we know of, would have asked for terms after Cannae. But Rome's Senate voted to continue the war. They refused to ransom the prisoners Hannibal had taken. They refused even to receive his envoys. They mobilized every resource the empire had and continued to fight. They understood something that Hannibal did not, that a battle is not a war, that Rome's true strength was not its army, but its system, its allies, its institutions, its culture of endurance, its refusal to accept defeat as final. Gradually, Rome ground Hannibal down. Cut off from reinforcements, unable to take Rome itself, he lacked siege equipment. Watching his allies gradually return to the Roman fold as Rome's resilience became apparent. Hannibal spent 16 years in Italy, and in the end, accomplished nothing. Rome then carried the war to Africa. A young Roman general named Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, invaded Carthaginian territory and forced Hannibal to return home to defend his city. At the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, Scipio defeated Hannibal in a rematch, and the Second Punic War ended in total Roman victory. Carthage survived, for now, but not for long. The Third Punic War lasted from 149 to 146 BC. It ended not in a military defeat, but in an act of deliberate annihilation. Rome besieged Carthage, destroyed it building by building, killed or enslaved its entire population. According to the Greek historian Appian, some 200,000 people died in the final siege, with 50,000 survivors sold into slavery, and then salted the ground so that nothing would grow there again. The Roman senator Cato the Elder had ended every speech he gave on any subject with the words Carthago delinda est. Carthage must be destroyed. After the Third Punic War, it was. With Carthage destroyed, Rome turned east. The great Hellenistic kingdoms that had inherited Alexander the Great's empire, Macedonia, Syria, Egypt, fell one by one to Roman legions. By the middle of the 1st century BC, the Mediterranean was, in every meaningful sense, a Roman lake. By the 1st century BC, the Roman Republic was showing its age. The system designed for a city-state was straining under the weight of a Mediterranean empire. The gap between the patrician elite and the plebeian masses had widened into a chasm. Military commanders had become political figures of enormous, independent power, with armies loyal to them personally rather than to Rome. Into this environment was born Gaius Julius Caesar, on or around July 12, 100 BC. He came from an aristocratic family, the gens Julia, who claimed descent from the goddess Venus herself through the legendary hero Aeneas. Whether or not this impressed the gods, it certainly impressed the Roman public. Caesar was, by any measure, one of the most remarkable human beings who ever lived. He was a military genius. He was a political operator of extraordinary skill. He was a writer of such clarity and elegance that his Gallic Wars is still read in Latin classrooms today. He was witty, charming, and ruthless, often simultaneously. But in the 50s BC, Caesar was still one of several powerful figures competing for dominance in Rome's increasingly chaotic political landscape. The Republic was in crisis. Social wars, slave rebellions led by figures like Spartacus, and the private armies of wealthy generals had shattered the old constitutional order. In 60 BC, Caesar made his first great political move. He formed an alliance with two of Rome's most powerful men, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, Rome's greatest living general, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, who had famously crushed the Spartacus slave rebellion. Together, these three formed what historians call the First Triumvirate, an informal but enormously powerful political alliance that effectively took control of Roman politics. In 58 BC,
Caesar was appointed governor of the province of Cisalpine Gaul and given the task of pacifying the remaining independent regions of Gaul, roughly modern-day France, Belgium, and parts of Germany and Switzerland. The Gallic tribes were numerous, fierce, and proud. They had no intention of submitting to Roman rule. The Gauls chose a brilliant young chieftain named Vercingetorix as their war leader. He was charismatic, tactically sophisticated, and deeply committed to the independence of his people. Under his leadership, the Gallic tribes put aside their traditional rivalries and united against the Roman invader.
The Gallic Wars lasted from 58 to 52 BC. They were campaigns of extraordinary violence. According to Caesar's own account, and to the biographer Plutarch, Caesar and his armies fought against 3 million Gauls over 8 years, killing 1 million of them and enslaving another million. These numbers may be exaggerated, but the scale of the devastation was unquestionable. The decisive moment came at the siege of Alesia in 52 BC. Vercingetorix had retreated to the hill fort of Alesia with 80,000 warriors. Caesar surrounded the fort with a double ring of fortifications, one facing inward to contain Vercingetorix, one facing outward to hold off the relief army of 250,000 Gauls that was marching to rescue him. Caesar was simultaneously besieging and being besieged. It was a military engineering achievement without parallel in the ancient world. And it worked. The relief army was repulsed. Vercingetorix, seeing no hope, rode out of Alesia, laid his weapons at Caesar's feet, and surrendered. He would later be strangled in a Roman prison after being displayed in Caesar's triumph. The conquest of Gaul made Caesar the most popular man in Rome. The wealth he brought back in gold, silver, slaves, and tribute was staggering. His soldiers worshipped him. The Roman public adored him. The Senate was terrified of him. In 49 BC, the Senate ordered Caesar to give up his command and return to Rome as a private citizen. They knew that his enemies would immediately prosecute him on political charges if he did so. Caesar faced a stark choice: submit and face destruction, or defy the Senate and risk civil war. On January 10th, 49 BC, Caesar stood on the northern bank of the Rubicon River, the boundary between his province and Italy proper. Roman law forbade any general from crossing this river with his army. To do so was an act of war against the Roman state. Caesar crossed. "The die is cast," he reportedly said. "Alia jacta est." And with those 3 words, he changed history. Caesar's civil war against Pompey and the Senate lasted 2 years. Pompey fled to Greece, then to Egypt after his defeat at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC. In Egypt, he was murdered by agents of the pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, who hoped to curry favor with the victor. Caesar reportedly wept when he was shown Pompey's severed head. His former ally, his son-in-law, a great Roman general, deserving of a better end. Caesar was stabbed 23 times. As the blows rained down, Caesar saw Brutus among his attackers. According to some accounts, his last words were spoken in Greek. Kai su teknon? You too, child? William Shakespeare rendered this as the immortal et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus? The assassins had believed that killing Caesar would restore the Republic. They were catastrophically wrong. Rome descended into 17 more years of civil war, and from that chaos, something even more powerful than Caesar would emerge. Octavian formed the Second Triumvirate with 2 of Caesar's senior commanders, Mark Antony and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. Together, they defeated Caesar's assassins at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. Brutus and Cassius both took their own lives rather than face capture. But triumvirates, by their nature, do not last. There is not enough power in the world to be equally shared between 3 ambitious men. Lepidus was the first to go, marginalized and stripped of his military command. That left Octavian and Mark Antony. Mark Antony was a brilliant soldier, brave, charismatic, beloved by his troops. He controlled the eastern half of the empire and was deeply involved in the affairs of Egypt, where he had entered into a passionate alliance, political and personal, with the Egyptian queen Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra was one of the most remarkable rulers of the ancient world. She was the first Ptolemaic monarch to actually learn the Egyptian language. She spoke 9 languages in total. She had previously had a liaison with Julius Caesar himself, bearing him a son named Caesarion. Now she was bound to Mark Antony, in love, in policy, and in the shared ambition to dominate the Roman world. Octavian saw his opportunity.
He launched a propaganda campaign accusing Antony of having been seduced by an Eastern queen, of abandoning Roman values, of planning to move the capital of the empire to Alexandria. He convinced the Roman Senate to declare war not on Antony, his fellow Roman, but on Cleopatra. The decisive battle came at Actium, off the coast of northwestern Greece in 31 BC. Octavian's naval commander Marcus Agrippa destroyed Antony and Cleopatra's combined fleet. The lovers fled to Egypt. Octavian followed. Trapped and defeated, Antony killed himself. Cleopatra, unwilling to be paraded through Rome in chains as a trophy of Octavian's triumph, followed him. Octavian was now the sole master of the Roman world. But Octavian was cleverer than Caesar. He understood that the Roman political class would never accept open monarchy. The word king was poisonous in Roman ears. It had been since the expulsion of Tarquin 5 centuries earlier. So Octavian wrapped his power in republican forms. He called himself not king, but princeps.
Rome has been gone for 15 centuries, and yet it is everywhere. Walk into the United States Capitol building, with its white marble columns and classical dome, and you are walking into a building designed explicitly to evoke Rome. The word Capitol comes from the Capitoline Hill in Rome. The United States Senate is named after the Roman Senate. The concept of a republic, a government that is res publica, the public thing, comes from Rome. The legal systems of most of continental Europe, France, Spain, Italy, Germany, Portugal, and their former colonies across the globe are built on Roman law, transmitted through the medieval church and the universities of the High Middle Ages. The principle that a person is innocent until proven guilty, the concept of legal personhood, the distinction between civil and criminal law, all Roman. The Catholic Church, which shaped European civilization for 1,000 years and continues to influence the lives of 1.4 billion people, is organized along Roman administrative lines, based in Rome, governed in a language, Latin, that is a direct descendant of what the Romans spoke, and led by a figure, the Pope, from the Latin papa, whose title has direct Roman antecedents. The Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, and their many dialects are all direct descendants of the Latin that Roman soldiers, merchants, and officials spread across Europe. English, though Germanic in structure, has absorbed enormous amounts of Latin vocabulary, through French, through law, through science, and through the church. Our calendar comes from Julius Caesar. Our months of July and August are named after Julius Caesar and Augustus. The word calendar itself comes from the Latin calende. The 7-day week, while Babylonian in origin, reached the world through Roman transmission.
The concept of a common law applying equally to all citizens, not just the powerful, was a Roman innovation. The concept of public works, roads, aqueducts, public buildings, free grain distribution as a government responsibility is Roman. The idea that conquered people should be incorporated into the conquering civilization, made citizens rather than simply subjects, is Roman. The physical infrastructure of Rome survives in unexpected places. The road network that Rome built across Europe forms the basis of modern European transportation networks. Highways in Britain, France, Spain, and Italy still follow routes laid out by Roman engineers 2,000 years ago. Roman bridges still carry traffic in Spain and Portugal. Roman aqueducts still carry water in the south of France. Rome was not simply an ancient civilization that happened to be impressive. Rome was the crucible in which the civilization we call the West was formed. Its political ideas, its legal concepts, its religious institutions, its languages, its engineering achievements. All of these flowed outward from the 7 hills above the Tiber and continue to shape human life today. When the Roman Empire fell, it did not disappear. It transformed. It became the Catholic Church. It became the languages of Europe. It became the legal codes of nations. It became the political vocabulary of democracy. It became the architecture